What's always interesting to me is the stories, not only the stories about individual cars, but the stories about how cars came to be. Today, it's not a story about the 300 SL, but it was this car that created the 507, arguably the rarest, most desirable BMW ever built. It was because of the success of the Gullwing that Max Hoffman, who was an importer and distributor in the US, convinced BMW they should be building a sports car. Something that was priced somewhere in between the Gullwing and say an MG or a Triumph, something that they thought they could sell 5,000 cars a year if they could get that price in around the $5,000 mark back in 1955-56. And they hired Albrecht von Gortz to design this car, and what a design it was. It was a beautiful body, basically put on a 503 chassis. They shortened the chassis, they reinforced the chassis. The first couple cars really were flexi flyers, so they went from a 1.75 millimeter chassis to a 2.5 millimeter chassis. They made it rigid. The bodies were all pounded out in aluminum. They were hand-built bodies. Every body is slightly different from the next one. What a beautiful design, and the styling today just sort of transcends time. Same reason they were inspired with the Z8 was really the 507 styling. And it's a simple car. When you compare it to the 300 SL, the Roadster, you can see it's a little bulkier, it's a little heavier, it's got bigger eyebrows. These ones are very refined. This one has the Rudge wheels. Obviously, you could get the Rudge wheels on an SL as well. But the cars were very similar from a performance point of view. This one was a little bit slower, a little bit lighter, but all in all, you could compare the two. You had a 6-cylinder 3-liter. Here you had an 8-cylinder 3.2-liter. The one made, say, 170 horsepower. This one made 150 horsepower. The Benz was a little bit more sophisticated, both from suspension point of view and mechanicals. It had mechanical fuel injection, 2 Zenith carburetors under the hood. They were 2 barrels. This one here was an all-aluminum V8. That was a straight 6. From a braking point of view, both cars started out with drum brakes. They both ended up with disc brakes. This car here is one of the late Series 2 cars that also has the disc brakes. From a weight point of view, the 300 SL looks a little heavier and is a little heavier. It's a few hundred pounds more than the 507. They had a beautifully designed car, a beautiful performing car, but they didn't hit the target of the price. With price overruns and just the manufacturing process taking more time, costing more money, what was supposed to be a $5,000 car ended up being almost a $10,000 car, priced very similarly to the 300 SL Roadster. If people had the option between the Mercedes, a tried and true, really sophisticated sports car that had a lot of race history, and the new 507, they went with the Benz. So the 507 kind of languished. They had real problems selling them. They only ended up selling 252 over all of the years. When it was introduced in 55 at the Waldorf to 59 when they shut it down. They couldn't stand losing any more money. It almost put BMW in the poorhouse. They almost went bankrupt over this car. And obviously when the car was launched, the styling caught the eye of many celebrities, probably the most notable being Elvis Presley. He ordered 2 of these cars. He was so in love with the car. The other celebrity and racer who really enjoyed this car was John Surtees. He was given a car in '56 for winning the 500cc World Championship, and he kept that car until 2018. When it finally sold in 2018, that car went for a record $5 million. He had a great handle on performance, and it was one of his favorite cars. What makes this the rarest, most desirable, and arguably the most expensive BMW ever produced? It really comes down to the styling. It was a beautiful, simple car. When you sit in the car, you look at the interior, and it's far less sophisticated than the 300 SL, but it's clean, it's simple. You have your speedometer, you have your tach, you have your smaller gauges for oil pressure and water temp, your clock, a radio. Very basic controls, very simple but really refined. Beautiful leather interior. And this car, what's great about this car is the fact that it's one of the few super original cars. Other than a repaint, it is a totally original, unrestored car. It has wonderful patina, Very hard to find, especially in a late Series 2 car. The Girling disc brakes, it's got the hard top, it's got the Rudge wheels. It's a super loaded, as good as you're gonna get 507 Series 2. Let's have a look under the hood. So again, really pretty engine bay with the two Zenith carburetors. They're only 2 barrels on top, 3.2 liter, all aluminum motor. It's a pretty engine. It's got the generator sitting on top, but it's also very clean under the hood. The bodies were really, like I said, hand-built aluminum bodies. Each one is slightly different than the next one, but it's super tidy. The firewall's tidy, the front end of the car is tidy, but what's really unique on this car when you start looking at it is the suspension. It's got a double wishbone in the front, and in it's got a torsion bar. So you look underneath there, there's no spring. There's a shock in between the two, but the torsion bar ends up running halfway into the car, and that's really your spring. What's really interesting is the rear end. It's got a solid axle in the back, and again, it's got a torsion bar instead of a spring and a panhard bar to hold it in place. That torsion bar runs from the back of the car, ends up all the way in the front of the car here. Really unique, really different sort of suspension, and it's got a really different sort of feel. It's a great run and driving car. They came with the 16-inch wheels. This one had the disc brakes, so it's really a great small, nimble car to drive. The fact that they only built 252 cars, the fact that it wasn't a big success, certainly not a commercial success back in the day, but all of that creates the story, what makes this car, again, more valuable than the 300 SL. Production numbers were, somewhere between 10 and 15% of that car, which adds to the value because of the rarity. But I think people really appreciate this car for what it is. It is one of the prettiest 50s roadsters ever built. It's ironic, what was supposed to be a cheaper car in the 50s, today is a much more valuable, arguably desirable car than the 300 SL.